Listeners everywhere, welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan, the weekly fix for your screen addiction and a trusted source for discussion of all things film and television. Please keep in mind that for the purposes of this podcast, Joel and Ryan are not acting as journalists, but rather fellow moving picture enthusiasts. All of their opinions should be taken as such. Also, please be warned that while Joel and Ryan may seem like petulant children, they are, in fact, adults who may occasionally use adult language. While they promise to bleep out all the worst words, it's a good bet you will still understand what they were saying. And now, with no further ado, here's Joel and Ryan.
Welcome to the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Once again, I am Joel.
And I'm Ryan.
And we're happy to have you here. And if you're here, most likely you know why you're here and what we're going to be talking about. It is the climactic conclusion to our deep dive into 1982's Blade Runner.
Not the last 10 minutes, but the penultimate 10 minutes of the Blade Runner soundtrack is called Wounded Animals. Isn't that pretty cool?
Yeah. And that's kind of
not tremendously musical track on there. One of the least, but it's a great name for the pretty much the final 10 minutes of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Are you bringing that up now as an indicator of how you think we're doing today?
I was going to answer that legitimately, but you're making a joke. I'm bringing it up now because my brain went, file this for later when you're talking about the end. And of course, when I do that, poof, there's like a 20% chance it's going to come back if I do that on a good day. But today, on a Monday, we haven't done a Monday podcast.
No.
And
no, we used to do them. Dear listener, we were just talking about how in the before times, we used to do these after work. We used to do them. I used to have a 2-show day, and between shows, I would haul my cookies over to Ryan's house. We'd record a podcast, and I'd go back and do the second show. And
it wasn't that long ago, but it does seem inconceivable now that we would do anything like that. Even this was. So we're really doing this thing after work tomorrow? And
we even had it out. And we're like, oh, we could move it. We could do it Saturday. Oh, no, you know what? It's probably better for everybody.
I'm glad we're hitting it, even if we're a little messed up. I'm glad we're
a little late
in
the day.
Well, it's still fresh in our minds. It's been less than a week since we watched it together. We left off not really with a cliffhanger, but with a game changer. We just heard some big news about a very clearly important character in the film, and we've just seen really the blood and guts and the harsh reality of what Blade running really is in this universe. So it was a good place to stop.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, we're right at the midpoint. Right at that.
Right in the middle of the movie. But even though we're in the middle of the movie, we're at the beginning of the podcast, and we're right at the beginning of the deep dives.
We are indeed. Here we go. Part 2 of our deep dive into Blade Runner.
I have to do a deep dive.
Deep dive. Deep dive.
I have to do a deep dive.
Deep dive. Deep dive.
I have to do a deep dive.
Deep dive. Deep dive. Deep dive.
When we last left our intrepid hero, Deckard, he had just retired Zora. She literally fell into the gap smashing through the Gap windows, taking out some mannequins.
It's a arresting sequence full of
Yep.
crazy reflections and brutal violence and
clear
and
plastic
terrible.
trench coats.
And
Clear
he's gone.
Yeah.
He's in the movie. He's gone and bought his drink already, right? Because this whole part of the film got all changed in order from how it was written, and it changed a lot of stuff. So I think he's gone and bought his drink. That's when Gaff comes up to him with the cane. We talked through that. He comes back to the spinner, and the lieutenant is there, and Emmett Walsh's character, and he tells him, there's four more, and then you're done. And he's like, no, there's 3 more. And I know I'm repeating myself, but let's just
this is
get a running start.
Previously on the movie show with Joel and Ryan.
He tells him, no, there's 4 more, and he's 3. And he's really pointed about it.
Yeah.
3, and then I'm done. And he's like, no, 4. That's skin job, and that's what he calls. I think is he the only one that calls him that? But
I think he is. That's the only time I think we ever hear that.
Again, the voiceover explains the slang skin job. What the epithet means. We don't really need that. We know what it means. You can just tell what that is. That's a horrible thing to call anybody, and that's what they call replicants. That skin job you interviewed over at the Tyrell Corporation, Rachel, she's gone missing. She's left. So you got to take care of her too. And then, Lieutenant Bryant just goes on about his day. And Gaff gives him Edward James Olmos gives him a little wink. All of Ed's stuff, not all of it, but so much of it's this wordless performance. It's really, in a way, we debated this on the show, but in a way that as long as you're getting the screen time in, not having to talk is one of the greatest gifts you can get from a project, because you're just doing the work without any of the other person's dialogue getting in your way of being. It really is. I don't know if easier is the term, but it just is a way to go at it in a pure internal way, which is very appealing to me.
Well, and it's absolutely maximizing every moment you have where you are getting caught by the camera, whether the camera's on you or whether you're in the camera frame. He absolutely maximizes every single moment. He does not. He's never turned off. He's always trying to find a way where Gaff can have some sort of impact on the moment, on the scene, on the everybody. And
knowing the way Ridley Scott works, he's earning the screen time that he's getting through the interesting things that he's doing. In the fantastic making of Alien, the feature-length version by Charles de Lauzirika, friend of the show, kind of, not really anymore.
No, he is. We're calling him friend of the show.
We're going to go with friend of the show.
We might even go with acolyte. He's an acolyte of the show. Well, anyway, he's currently working on a behind-the-scenes documentary about our podcast.
That would be nice. That would be the dream. But past guest, super fellow film fanatic and just a guy I admire greatly. In the Alien documentary, he captures Scott saying his philosophy about directing actors, and it is 90% casting them correctly. because he really lets them float after that. And he'll tell them what, go there, go here, louder, faster, slower, but he's just not gonna sit down and talk about your feelings with you much when you're working, so you have to have it. And Alien, of course, casting it's perfect. It's perfection. And this is the same. It is really, really good. And yet nobody's really getting a lot of special attention from him as far as directing. Sean Young probably more than most, but he literally in Dangerous Days, the making of Blade Runner. It's a 2.5-hour feature-length documentary. I said it on the Charles de Lauzarica interview that there's a lot. I have a lot of real deep favorites. Hearts of Darkness, The Making of Apocalypse Now, Under Pressure, The Making of the Abyss, The Hamster Factor, The Making of 12 Monkeys. These are documentaries that are they're the best ever. But Charles's Dangerous Days is the bar none, and it's partly because the making of this is so rife with stories and firsthand accounts and people differing opinions while they were working. Like, it just got so much great stuff in it, and so many people were involved in that doc. I think it's the greatest to date documentary on the making of a movie ever. And we're kind of just talking about it. I could take, because Future Noir, the book that was written about it, back at the time it was kind of, or back around the late 80s when it was still a relatively fresh film. And this documentary, which came out with the final cut, which was, I don't know, it's getting 10, 12 years ago now. Mm-hmm. They're just the finest things ever. And they're so full of interesting stories and anecdotes. And I'm sharing a couple as we go, but I just kind of don't have to, because I'm taking this moment here. I'm going to kind of save this to the end of the show, but there'll be a lot to talk about at the end of the show when the movie wraps, actually. Anyway, so just know those things are incredible resources. I don't know how anyone couldn't be riveted by Dangerous Days. Maybe a book is too much of a commitment. I don't know, but Future Noir is it's just a stunning book and account, at a time when the cult was still pretty small for this movie. We'll save why for the breakdown of the various versions that I promised you that's coming up.
Right.
Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. I was going to tell you, well, I'm talking about Ridley Scott's idea of casting and his letting almost just do it, his letting Rutger just go off, his capturing and embracing every weird little tick that William Sanderson puts on screen. Mm-hmm. All of it, it's just kind of amazing to behold. And it really is. It's not done in a vacuum, but it's not done with a ton of like Paul Feig, like, let's sit around in a circle and talk about this scene sort of direction. There's a lot of lighting going on here. There's every little thing is.
Well, it goes back to
acumen with which Blade Runner was made required a lot of attention, and it required a lot of time of Ridley's not looking at a monitor, not talking to an actor, but literally looking through the lens of a camera.
Yeah. It goes back to our production meeting episode 2 episodes ago. All of those people and all of those positions that we talked about and how they help to make a movie, all of those almost all of them end up reporting to the director in some way. And the director is responsible for all of, that's why we still say it's a director's medium, because ultimately that director is choosing all of the things and anyone who has a question. And so simply there just isn't enough. I mean, that's why casting does become so important, because you have to cast people who are going to work the way you need them to work. Whether that is, like you said in Paul Feig's case, being willing to sit down and talk about things, or is it someone who, is just like, I've done all the work.
I rip on Paul Feig a lot, but I'm not ripping on him in that case.
This is his choice.
That's his strength as a storyteller, and it shows up on screen.
Spielberg,
it's not Ridley's strength.
Spielberg, I know, like for West Side Story, Anna Isabel talked about how, they had rehearsals and they sat and talked about things, and they really broke the whole story down. In this case, there just isn't time and money enough to do that. And so the casting of who all that actor work, the choices that are being made need to be made have to be made when you show up, so that all of these other people who have just, spent time making it look like it's raining and all of this stuff like that. They ain't standing around waiting for you to find your waiting for you to find how what's going on here. How am I supposed talk to me about how I'm supposed to, where you see this going. No, that work's got to be done.
Yeah.
And
it's captured in the movie, and it's fully realized by everybody. There's not a weak performance in the film. Truly.
No, there really isn't. That was one of the things, having watched it again this past time over at your house, is really absolutely how there was no one in that movie that wasn't fully bought in, fully committed to this story and how Ridley Scott and others chose to tell this story. Everyone was on the absolutely on the same page.
Yeah, although again, lots of tension between the actors, lots of tension between the director and the star, lots of tension still, but the work shows up on screen, and it's typically known as, I think because Harrison has badmouthed it through the years, it's typically known as one of his weaker performances because he's a character that's adrift in the story and doesn't know who he is, doesn't want to be involved in any of this, and is reacting to sort of everything that's being thrown his way. And it was his frustration that the character's not very active, but there's real growth there, even though you don't get Scrooge, on Christmas morning coming out letting us all know how everything's changed. There's not enough time for all that when the story comes to a conclusion, but you get a profound change from him, and and that only works if everything else, like Joel said, if there's truth in everything else every step of the way. And the other person who's commonly criticized in the film is Sean Young, and I think the more I learn about acting and the more I watch what she's doing in every frame of this movie, it's really, really good. I mean, she's as much as anybody, she's coming at this from a really interesting place, and we're able to track that through the movie. And speaking of Rachel, as the spinner drives away.
Yep.
Sorry, Joel, I know the segue is your purview, but.
Yeah, well, no, hey, that's a solid one. You've had two really solid segues here in this episode. You are a Monday segue man.
I'm coming alive. I come alive at night. Joel is a father and got other things going on. And
no,
like
sadly, I still come alive at night, but not until like 10. So I got a couple hours yet.
So this is a little early for you, huh?
It's a little early.
Have you had your coffee?
Yeah. No, that's how I get through the early parts of the day. Anyway,
the cops leave our intrepid hero with a bottle of booze sitting in the middle of the street. Where the booze goes and how it comes back, that's part of a bit of a continuity error here, by the way they changed the order of things. Nevertheless, he sees in the crowd, and it's very much visually parallels the way he spotted Zora in the crowd. Yeah, he sees Rachel in one of her ridiculous upper class get-ups that she's walking around in this weird fur coat with this, I don't know what you call the big thing that comes up behind her. Yeah, that even has a name.
It's almost like a comically large shawl collar.
It's not that she looks bad. It looks chic and ritzy, but it looks so out of place in this grimy world that we're inhabiting.
Right.
And just the way she moves, the way she's walking, it's just a one little blip. We catch her out of the corner of our eye with from his point of view. And of course, he's just been told he has to assassinate her. So I don't know if we can see his reaction to that idea, and it's not a positive one. So I don't know that she's in peril in this moment. But obviously he takes off after her. And on his way, he gets intercepted by Leon, who's been waiting for his friends to leave to beat the crap out of him. And It's a fun beating, and it's weird. It's like a lot of things in Blade Runner. It's so strange, the conversation they have while Deckard is facing one of his many beatdowns of the movie. What's his first thing he says? What does Leon say? The great Brian James. He says, blah, 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 blah. My birth date is what, how long do I have to live?
How long do I have to live? Yeah.
He's like 4 years. And he's like, longer than you. He just starts beating him up. Great moment where Deckard kind of pulls out the gun and gets it slapped out of his hand. He gets shoved up against a thing. He gets kind of beaten across the face several times. It's amazing scene, and I don't like to repeat the dialogue so much when we do this, but there's dialogue here that's repeated later in the most meaningful moment in the film that's interesting. And I'm remembering how the scene ends, but there's something that happens. Terrible thing to live in fear, isn't it? Is what he says to him. And he says nothing, and then he beats him up some, and then he says, it's nothing worse. And Byron James is so great in this moment. Nothing worse than having an itch you could never scratch. And Deckard can barely talk, and he said, I agree. And he gets the whole exchange is absurd, and you're quite certain he's going to die. And Leon finally gets him where he wants him, slaps him upside the face a couple of times, and says, wake up, time to die. And he takes his fingers like he's going to stick them right through his eyes into his brain. Yep. And right as he's about to do that, you hear a gunshot. You see the wound in sort of his forehead, and he sort of falls over on top of Deckard. And it's in a great reveal. It's hard to say how visually cool all this is, but in a great reveal, we see Rachel. She's picked up the gun that got kicked away, and from a pretty decent distance has shot this replicant. Basically, the only place she could kill him with one shot. Zora has demonstrated that, and Leon is at least, if not the most powerful of these four replicants. They're all pretty tough customers, but he's strong, and I love him because he's clever. When we first meet him, he seems like such a dope and such a child, and we realize that that's really part of all of these characters. The only character that doesn't let us see some side of their inner child is Zora. We never really get that from her, but Leon gives it to us, and we think, well, it's because he's the dumb one, but you see it from Pris, and you definitely see it from Roy, and you just realize that they are children. They're 4-year-olds as much as they're sophisticated, hyper-intelligent, super powerful androids. They are children. Deckard leaps into action. He goes and takes the gun from her and hustles her out of frame and off to the next thing.
Real quick before we move on this, I mean, one of the things that I think is worth pointing out in this whole thing, I mean, and we see it again towards the end, but this fight in particular, I mean, it's one of Harrison Ford's great gifts is how his characters get beat up.
Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree.
The reactions that he how he lets his body fall or get the momentum of a punch, how it carries him, the disbelief of how much pain he is in. It's one of his spectacular gifts. And you really get, and this is another great example, because like you said, he's like trying to talk. He's like, if I keep talking to Leon, he'll stop hitting me, and
because he's trying to hit him back and do. It's just not a totally one-sided fight. It's just everything Deckard's doing is having zero effect, and it is the way his weird humor comes through, even though he's not playing it like it's humorous. It is awesome, and I agree. Harrison's great. He doesn't find it interesting to be a superhero, and he's never really been one in anything I can think of.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing more fun than when her heroism is when Indiana Jones picks himself up off the mat and goes back to work, even though he's just been beaten to a pulp.
Right.
That's what's fun, and that's what's relatable, and that's Deckard's not as fun as that, but he's got a little bit of that. That's that old magic that Bryant was talking about in that briefing scene. This guy's a survivor somehow, and in confrontations with these creatures, he's come out ahead every time. Mm-hmm. This time, he's just seconds from biting it. He needs somebody's help who you suspect has never shot a weapon in her life. It's outstanding scene. And what happens? What's the next scene? Is it back in their apartment?
Yeah, it goes back to Deckard's apartment with Rachel. That's where he smuggles her away to, and they converse over drinks.
Beforehand, this happens off screen, but presumably he went and found where the bottle of gin was or whatever he bought, because he's still got that in his hand. That's just a weird continuity error. The beating happened before the liquor and the cop scene originally, and it was confusing because there's all this extra stuff where she's got to hide, and they fixed it. They'd also screwed up the replicant count for the second time in the movie. So it was not a perfect film. Okay, we'll admit that. Even in its original form, it took several goes at it to kind of perfect it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Back in Deckard's apartment, which we've seen a good deal of now. I love the shot, the close up of him drinking out of the little shot glass and the blood rolling into the water.
Holy buckets! That's great. Yeah.
It's so awesome. I love her, the way I love watching her play the piano. Mm-hmm. What's he say to her? You got the shakes. This is his whatever. Obviously stuff's transpired with him on the way back to his place, but yeah, I get him too. I get him bad. So there's this, now they both killed a replicant, like they have this connection between them. Mm-hmm. I guess that's what suffices for a date in this type of story. This whole scene is awkward and weird, and it was really created in the editing. That's something Ridley does, that you can really feel it sometimes, how this wasn't what was intended. This is what he made out of what he ended up with, and it's just super interesting in that way. It feels like there's a really important thing that we missed early in the thing before he was playing with the photos. He had a little vision, didn't he? That also happened at his apartment.
Oh yeah, in my breakdown here, it doesn't have little.
It doesn't have Unicorn Dream in it.
Does not have Unicorn Dream,
which is a good band name, by the way.
Yeah,
just a suggestion.
You know what I thought would also be a good band name is Clear Plastic Jacket.
Nice. Clear Plastic Jacket, and you already have your sort of visual motif started for you, which is important with bands these days. Clear Plastic Raincoat, maybe.
Clear Plastic, actually, Clear Plastic Trench Coat is what I originally came up with, but I don't think it's a full trench coat. It's short. It's one of those, yeah.
It is, and it's, in terms of covering it, I guess it keeps you dry, but in terms of covering any other part of your body. And then, of course, being dry is not super important when you put it on immediately after you come out of the shower either. So that whole style, anyway,
does not really breathe. Yep.
Joanna Cassidy as Zora is a treat. She's fantastic. Before that scene, I hate to go back like this, but I just feel like this is where we have to do it. We can't wait to the end to do it, or it feels like we're bringing the setup only just to have a payoff, like they do in really bad TV shows. You know what I mean? He was sitting there plunking on his piano. We never see him play the piano, but he twiddles with it when he's thinking. And you can't really call it a dream because he's awake when it happens. It feels more like a memory. Like a memory that is being shared with us, the audience. But he's twinkling on the piano, looking at the photos. He's got this whole array of like antique photos, some of them from all eras and stuff, like maybe they're family heirlooms or something. I really don't know. But his collection of photos mirrors that of Leon's precious photos that he's going back to. There's some connection there that's not explained any more than I'm explaining to you here. That's interesting. And then Rachel in the scene that we're at right now, not a previous scene, is interested in these photos as well. She's drawn to them. She carries one of her mother along with her. That proves her humanity to herself, real or imagined.
Mm-hmm.
But this vision that he has, or this memory that he experiences, or this dream that he has, people really do call it a dream. It's not a dream, and I think it's significant that it's not a dream. He doesn't wake up from it.
Right.
Is shot. It looks very much like a leftover shot from Legend. This scene didn't appear until 1992 when Legend was in the rearview mirror. So a lot of people claimed, "Oh, it's an outtake from Legend," but no, it's in the script. Here it is. It was shot in one glorious take where this horse with a unicorn horn did this perfect kind of. It's just perfect. It's a perfect horse performance, I have to say. Watch it. He travels this distance and stays in frame the entire time, and right when he needs to do some dramatic move that carries him out of frame, he does it. Good job. It's a unicorn dream, though.
Mm-hmm.
And the unicorn is important, kind of symbol of later versions of Blade Runner.
Right.
Not included in the original version. The producers thought it was a stupid non sequitur and sort of insisted that he cut it.
Right.
So then,
but we get
20 minutes of movie happen, and we're back here, back in his apartment. Rachel's with him. He's kind of trying to make her feel better. She's asking him all these questions. You know, she's like interrogating him in a sort of weird way.
Yep.
That Voight comp test of yours, do you ever use that test on yourself, she says. And then she's like, Deckard. And he's literally fallen asleep with his drink on his chest. This is probably a position that he ends up in a lot in his life,
right.
you would imagine. And he's not answering her anymore. So she heads over to the piano, plays with the photos, and plays this piece of music. I can't remember what the music is, but it's a thing. And it's really, really cool how both when Deckard's twinkling with the piano and when she's playing with the piano, Vangelis's music never stops either time. It is in the same key and it complements the music. It doesn't accompany the music. That would be cheesy and horrible, and you would recognize that as stupid. But the music in and then what happens, sort of the droning along with it, and then the music out is amazing. It's just another thing that's amazing about Vangelis. And this sort of love theme from Blade Runner that starts playing during the scenes, you can probably figure out where this scene's going. There's not a lot of love in the love scene in Blade Runner. And I really didn't like it. And it's come full circle. What we all didn't like about it back in 1982 went away for decades. And we all thought, this is actually the whole movie right here. Like, this is brilliant. And now it's come back to, did Deckard assault Rachel? ? And somebody blogs about it for a couple of pages and explains to you why Blade Runner is a horrible movie, because he doesn't treat her particularly kindly in their, quote, lovemaking scene. We never get to the lovemaking, but he does come over to her on the piano, and he said, I dreamt of music. And she said, yeah, I remember lessons. I don't remember if it was mine. And then she repeats his joke back to him, or Terrell's nieces. And he either doesn't connect with that, or he doesn't dignify that with a response. He's got one thing on his mind. He just gives her the compliment that you played beautifully, and then he leans in. He starts kissing her in the neck. Sean Young's brilliant in this part of it. She's kind of like, it's hard to explain. She's not doing nothing, but she's doing almost nothing, like as an actor, to indicate what that might be. But when it comes time to kiss on the lips, she backs away from him. And then kind of goes, oh, something clicks with her. Again, this is this childlike nature of the replicants of the story. This is weird and awkward. We've all been part, maybe not of something like this scene, but we've all been part of something weird and awkward that was physical between the sexes or between the same sexes, whoever the object of the desire in your life was at the time. Right. And probably it happened when you were younger, I would imagine. That's certainly when it happened to me.
Yeah, I think for most people, for me, it's usually like, it was like 2 weeks ago.
Right.
If we don't talk, my wife doesn't talk about it.
Hey, you're trying new things, man. That's how you keep that's how you keep the
for a
spice
long
alive.
time. Yep.
She heads for the door in a hurry, and he follows her there. It beats her there. It's his weird apartment full of clutter and junk. And slams the door and sort of grabs onto her and starts kissing her at the door. And then he shoves her up against the blinds along his window. And blinds, whenever there's like a fight or a whatever against blinds, they kind of rattle and make all that weird sound. Mm-hmm. And he tells her what she's to say to him. And he makes her repeat it more vehemently. Yep. And he, like I said, he shoves her up against the wall, but then he does this kind of thing where he's like, I'm not going to hurt you. Yeah. But, and he doesn't, but it's still like, it's a weird master and servant. You are this artificial thing. I am a person, and I am dominating you in this scene. Mm-hmm. Luckily, I think maybe, yes. We'll say, fortunately, when he eases it up and treats her a little gently, she decides it's okay. And she even is given in the script a line where whatever happens next, we don't see it. It is her idea. That helps, but it doesn't take away the intense awkwardness of this exchange. And the scene in the script and in the original, not the original version of the film, but the idea was that this just went on and on and on. And there was a lot more of this after this. Where they leave this scene is the perfect spot. And I just think that it's a terrible thing to live in fear. What does it mean to be a slave? These are things that the film asks. And what is this relationship between this guy who he's clearly attracted to her? He's even trying to take care of her in a weird way. He's counseling her through this rough moment. And then when it comes time to fulfill his desire, he's just not very nice to her. And I agree that you can't read it any other way. And it's hard to believe that from this point on, there's something between these characters other than lust, really. Yeah. Because that's what we're left with at the end of this scene. But the lust is palpable. And Sean plays it really, really good without her, because he's such a guy and he's got one thing on his mind and he's this id of a thing in the scene. And she's got to take care of all the sort of nuances and all the sort of amazing what is happening, what is going on stuff. And it's pretty killer by her. And she had to get tossed around this apartment set for what, 2 days or something, probably?
Yeah.
Not fun, probably.
No. To me, the scene, it felt like, to me, for Deckard, felt like here's a guy who has, who has retired a whole bunch of replicants in his career. And now he's been forced into retiring to this point. Well, one more, and he's gotten the crap beaten out of him. Here's another replicant that he knows is a replicant, and it sort of felt to me like that primal, I'm going to take my reward. sort of feeling. Like
he tries at the piano to be tender with her.
No,
It's
he
only
does.
when she turns him down that he sort of goes all crazy.
And that's what I mean is like he's like, I think it's like, you know, I you know, he legitimately he's feeling things, but then when he's rejected, it is that that I have been, you know, she becomes. Well, now I can't.
It's tricky.
It's really
the
tricky
trickiest scene in a tricky movie. I really do think that.
I mean, but she knows she's a replicant, and he can, you know, and he does have a go dominant over her, and it felt to me like that whole to me it felt like, you know, I am taking my, you know, I've been forced into this situation. I'm going to take my reward, and you know, it's icky, but you know, it's, you know, it is reciprocated to some extent, but it is icky.
Ultimately, it is reciprocated. Yeah.
Ultimately.
And the movie is going to pay that off to some degree. But the scene is, as far as love scenes, again, I put love in quotes for the scene, and the music is like, the sax and the electric piano, that sounds corny, and it is, but it isn't, because Vangelis is really, he's just a genius with mood and atmosphere. So but the music is antithetical to what we're seeing. It's like paying off like the most expensive like porno movie score that you ever heard in 1982. Right. And it's just, the whole thing is kind of amazing. And every time I watch it, I make sure to not look away from it. Look at every detail. Look what's going on between these two people, because you get invested in them, and this is a weird moment, no question. And I really do think the biggest ideas of the movie are all happening here in a wordless way. Yeah. Earlier in the scene, she asks him, "You seen that thing about life expectancy and all that? Did you see that?" And he's like, "It's classified." And she's like, "Yeah, but you're a policeman." And he's like, "I didn't look at it." So is he lying to her? I don't know, but it feels like he's lying. And if he's telling the truth, he's sure doing it in the most weird, suspicious way ever. Right. She asks him even before she starts in on that. She says, "Would you, if I ran away? I mean, what can I do if I ran away? Would you come after me? Would you hunt me and kill me?" And he goes, "No, I wouldn't. I owe you one," he says. What a weird thing to say to her in that moment. But I owe you one, he says. That's what heroes say in movies like this. They say that cliche a lot. Yeah. But as he's walking by her, and this is a stunning moment, because she's standing there and his kitchen lights are reflected in her eyes, and they are masking her pupils, which we know because it's been explained to us that the Voight-Comp test studies the pupil, and it based on its reactions, it decides whether you're human or not. We cannot see, or as I say in my very pretentious review, if eyes are the windows to the soul, I'm paraphrasing myself now, but if eyes are the windows to the soul, what are we to take from the fact that these replicants are shown and shot with their eyeballs obscured to us in some weird way so often in the film? It's an interesting idea that is worth exploring. I don't know if there's right answers to it. It could just be coincidence. It's hard to say. He walks by her and he says, "No, I wouldn't. I owe you one." And then he turns back to the camera so that he's looking the same direction as her, over her shoulder. And he says, "But somebody would." Yeah. And his eyes are the same as hers. It's really, really amazing. It's really, really amazingly shot moment. And
I do love this little bit of trivia that it's a technique invented by Fritz Lang, known as the Schuften process, where it's the Schuften with an umlaut, Schuften, with a piece of mirrored glass mounted at a 45-degree angle to the camera. So when they hit their mark, it's gonna do that reflection in the
We saw it in Leon's eyes in the interview at the beginning. We saw it in Zora's eyes in her dressing
We see
room.
it in the owl's eyes.
You see it in the owl's eyes.
Yeah, when we meet.
Which is not a real owl, by the way.
No, yeah, we should. Yeah, in case you missed it, in case for some reason you skipped the first part of this, there's an owl. It's not real. So anyway, while all of that is going on back at Deckard's apartment, Roy and Pris are getting Sebastian to they're explaining to him what that's Roy
Is
comes
there a
in.
chapter name to this? Maybe you should just say that.
No, I don't. I have a beat by beat, minute by minute breakdown. So it doesn't have any.
Pris is prettying herself up. She's totally punk rock.
By obscuring her eyes.
Or at least the outer parts of her eyes. She's making this sort of raccoon makeup job, and she's cleaned herself up, and she's taken off her weird ratty coat, and she's in this sort of bodysuit thing, and her hair, which is still the same but was really, really ratty when we meet her, is now kind of awesome. Mm-hmm. And it's Daryl Hannah when she's like 25 years old, so she's just as gorgeous as you can imagine her being, given that she's got all these affectations. And it's kind of sad, although I don't know. I really give J.F. Sebastian all the credit. I think he does. I think he's super lonely. I think this woman's being really nice to him. I think anybody in his position would be taken with her and thinking more or less that he hit the jackpot. Right. And he's talking. He's talking to her, and she's like, "Well, what do you think? How do you think I look? Do you like it? It's different." And she's like, Sanderson's so great in this part. He doesn't know. He doesn't know what to say. Right. He does not know what to say, but he admits that he thinks she's beautiful, and she thanks him and everything. And right at that, where the date is really, really working, or where you really think you're hitting it off and you're about to get the person's number, her actual boyfriend walks in. And it's important to say that even though with Leon and Zora, we're not told they're together, but they're together. It's very clear that Leon is in love with Zora. And even from the photo, it's kind of clear that Zora's in love with Leon. It's hard to explain that he has this token of her. And that's implicit, but it's there. It is, and it's interesting. The coupling isn't what you think. Roy and Zora really seem more compatible. This is very much a Last of the Mohicans kind of coupling, where the two alpha people are not with each other; they're with the other people, and maybe that's truer to life. I don't know. But it's neat. Anyway, she's just right when Sanderson's smiling and feeling at his most confident and that he's done the right thing. She says, "Hi, Roy." Yep. And standing out of focus behind them is Rutger Hauer, and it makes Sebastian jump out of his chair. Obviously, there's a stranger in here with him. And he's like, "Hi." And he goes, "Man, you sure have some neat toys in here." Yeah. This whole scene is really great because it's not. They don't use the tactic that he and Leon that Roy and Leon used on Chew. Mm-mm. This is okay. But of course, what they need from Sebastian is more. It's trickier than what they were trying to get out of Chew, which was really just information. That was an interrogation. This has to be handled more delicately because there's. At least to some degree, there has to be a willingness on Sebastian's part to help them out. Mm-hmm. He's already helped Pris immeasurably. But, Roy comes in and he said, what's he say? "Oh, Sebastian, I like a man who stays put." Yeah. Rutger's so weird. I can't just quote every line, but every line is quotable. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make. That's the line that means nothing, but it's amazing, and it tells you something. Roy, in the intervening scenes has gotten some information. Maybe from Pris, maybe when she let him in the apartment. We're not sure when that happened. But he's been filled in, and to the point that by the end of the movie, he seems to know everything, almost like he's been watching the movie with the rest of us. Stuff that we're like, how does he know that? How does he know that? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe that's not the point. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't be so literal about things. Hard to say. But they talk about it, and they explain to him in this scene, we have the same problem you have. And he's like, what's that? And they're like, I can't remember the exact term. It ends with decrepitude, premature decrepitude or something like that.
Yeah, let me see.
They're dying too fast, and they want to live, and they need his help. And he guesses that now he didn't know this about Pris, but now he's getting it. You guys are Nexus 6s. I knew it. And he goes, you guys are amazing. Show me a trick. And she reaches into the boiling eggs and grabs an egg and does the egg toss to him. But there's this tremendously sad scene, and it's the best William Sanderson has ever been in anything ever. It's just, and he's a good actor. She kind of comes up behind him and wraps her legs around him, and she's like, and Batty, because he can't help himself, is threatening him. He goes, you have to help us talk to Eldon Tyrell, because if you don't, Pris hasn't long to live. And as you can tell, as Rutger started talking about that, he's emotionally distraught over that, and he gets more and more intense. And Howard's just terrifying in the scene. And Sebastian is terrified. And he says, we can't have that. And then there's this long pause, and it's just, Sebastian doesn't say anything. And this is kind of amazing. Pris, the diplomat of the two, breaks in and says, we're so glad you agreed to help us. Like the camera is not cut away. I don't know how to explain it. He has not agreed to help them. They're telling him, and they're trying to be subtle about it, but they're telling him he doesn't have any choice. And she's like, I don't think there's another person in the whole world who would have helped us. You're our best and truest friend, she says. Yep. Daryl Hannah, again, genius. She's so great. But he hasn't agreed to help them. He can't imagine this going well in any sort of good way. And he runs out of the room, and they sort of give themselves this knowing look. But there's more to all this exchange, all this stuff in these sequences. It's, she says, Leon, and again, Batty doesn't even answer her. He just starts to cry, and he says, it's just us now. And it's just, it's weird, but it's desperately sad when he says that to her.
There's only two of us.
Private moment.
There's only two of us now.
And she's like, then we're stupid and we'll die. And he starts to smile. He gets to be the man. He gets to comfort her. No, we won't. His force of will, he believes, is going to win the day somehow throughout this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, then we see the chessboard. Then Roy notices the chessboard.
Who's your opponent?
Is he any good?
Dr. Tyrell, he's a genius. I've only ever beat him once in chess, he says. And Roy sort of studies the board and stuff, and he makes a move even, and Sebastian's like, no good. See, rook takes queen. And then he's like, okay, and you can see the wheels sort of spinning with him. And I did that all out of order, but I'm doing the best I can with these scenes. Because none of it happens in that order.
Yeah,
actually.
No. And
other than Pris prettying herself up at the beginning of the sequence, everything else I did was out of order, but you get the highlights. There's a plot at hand here. JF's going to be key to it. We knew that. Roy and Pris are in love with each other. We weren't sure, but you see it. They are madly in love with each other like teenagers. And Roy, when he takes his big trench coat off and walks around the room and is trying to be nice to somebody, is actually capable of being interested in another person and interacting with them in a way that isn't terrible. It's only when premature decrepitude comes up that he starts to get a little angry. Accelerated. That's so much better.
Yeah.
Sorry, David or Hampton, whoever, I just ruined your cool phrase. Whichever of you it was, it's an awesome accelerated decrepitude. And the way, and it's weird the way Pris changes, because she's gone from this quiet, scared thing to this super hot, confident, although still very childlike and innocent in a way, character. She's just, you're seeing her true self for the first time. This isn't an act for JF's benefit. And I think the three of these guys can actually work out these problems, and we might have a happy ending.
Right. I do love the moment where Sebastian is, he just said, and Roy says, like, Sebastian, why are you staring at us? And it's Roy that says it. Because if it's Pris saying that, well, then it can be,
then it's a loaded question, right?
But it's like, why are you staring at us? He's like, because you're so different. You're
so perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. And
perfect.
Yeah. So anyway, let's keep it rolling here. So we get so then we get
we're not computers, Sebastian.
Yeah.
Physical.
I think, therefore I am, Sebastian.
Excellent, Pris. Now show him why. The whole scene just awesome. Everything about it is awesome. It's fantastic.
So we get to we go to the Trail Corporation, and JF is helping them. They're helping, and it's Pris has stayed behind at House de Sebastian, and so it's
at
just
the Bradbury. It's kind of neat. They feature the Bradbury sign in it, so they've named it what it is in real life, which is kind of clever.
And so we go, and he uses the chessboard. He uses the chess game to
you see that again. You see this incredible model of the Tyrell Corporation headquarters again in detail. You see that they're in this glass elevator that's riding up the sort of angled side of the building, and it stops, and then you see Tyrell trading stocks in his giant, huge, ornate sort of Victorian style bed, and with all these little modern accoutrements around, these little machines that who knows what they do, and his huge trifocals. And then he gets this thing, computer voice says code blue something, or blue entry code, it's JF Sebastian. And he's like, Sebastian, what's going on? He gets up and he puts his robe on and walks across the room. It's obviously the middle of the night. He says, what is it, Sebastian? Why are you here? And Sebastian doesn't say anything, but we see that he's in the elevator with Roy, because it's all audio on Tyrell's side. He doesn't see that at all. So we're starting to get how this is going to work. And Sebastian doesn't say, well, I have this. He just says, queen to whatever, queen to rook 7 or whatever. And then he's like, what? Nonsense, Tyrell says, and he goes over to his chessboard, which is JF's is all kind of marble and weird, like his place, and this one is all like pewter and made of castles and things. It's their chessboards represent themselves, and he says, queen, rook takes queen, just like Sebastian said would happen. And he goes, what are you thinking about, Sebastian? And Sebastian says, well, bishop to whatever 7, checkmate, I think. And it's actually Roy says it to him, and then he says it again he adds the I think, because he's such a subservient, squirrely little guy that he doesn't want to be presumptuous, even though he knows it's checkmate. I've always hated this about the chess scene. I like the chess. I love the chess as Batty's entry into this forbidden world. I think that's brilliant, actually. But anyone who are at genius level and play chess aren't likely to be fooled with checkmate in 2 moves coming from any angle. The idea that you would sacrifice your queen for mate isn't no offense, but it just isn't a foreign idea to chess novices like myself, let alone these guys.
Yeah.
So that always annoys. I wish there were a few moves in there, but I get it. Let's get to the point. Blah blah blah. It's
Right.
chess. Let's just accept it for the figurative.
Well,
and,
you
and
see, Ryan. You
metaphorical
see,
thing that it
Ryan.
is.
You see, Ryan. In the future, there are only two people that play chess, and that is J.F. Sebastian and Eldon Terrell. So they're not very good.
Even from a chess standpoint, he makes this move. It looks like the dumbest move ever. And when you see the dumbest move ever, your instinct is to not examine ahead. It's to boom. It's to end the thing. It's to make your move to counter it. And that short-sightedness becomes his downfall. Well, Terrell's impressed with this mate. He says, well, milk and cookies kept you awake, huh? That's such a condescending line.
Yep.
Come up, Sebastian. Let's discuss this. And he comes up, and Roy smiles, and Roy comes out of the elevator, or Sebastian comes up first. He goes, this is my friend Roy. And again, Turkel with not even being able to see his eyes, just his weird mouth that doesn't even really do anything. Yeah, I don't know what it is, if it's body language or whatever. But a great actor once said, if you're thinking the right things, the camera will capture it.
Right.
And that's what's going on with with Joe Turkel as Terrell in the scene. He's thinking, whoa, this is terrible. This is not a good thing that this is happening. There's fear and trepidation, and it's all in this little slight change of body language. But Terrell's a smooth operator, and he says, hello. And he greets him. He's like, I was wondering when you were going to show up. And they sit down, and it really is. He calls him the prodigal son return, and it really is that feeling. It's, I'm embracing you. It starts with this scientific debate, which is technobabble of the first order. It all sounds fantastic and probably has some basis in reality, but nucleotides and the viruses stemming from different mutations within cells, everything they're discussing it's on PhD level. We don't understand it. The fact that Roy understands it's what's impressive, because he goes right to, this is how we're going to fix this stuff. And I always thought, and of course I have the benefit of hindsight, Joel, but I always thought, hey, he should have just said, oh, hey, yeah, let's try that. I'll get the operating table ready for you right now. But he doesn't. He can't help himself. Terrell is a super pompous and superior cat, and he shoots down all these scientific arguments, and he explains to him, once we've set the code to behave in a certain way, any alteration does nothing but collapse the entire system. And you were made as good as we can make you, he tells him. And Batty, now that he's starting to feel defeated, for the first time, we're seeing him not vulnerable for the first time, but we're seeing him start to get it. This can't be fixed. Nothing I thought of is going to work. He says, but not to last. He goes, yes, Roy, but the candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long. He keeps complimenting him. He goes, look, you should be so proud of the things you've done. And he says, I've done questionable things. And he goes, yes, but also extraordinary things. Revel in your time. And Roy, with his head down, he does this, Howard, you can't see me do it. And those of you out in good old fashioned podcast land aren't watching me anyway, but he does this side eye thing where, again, his body language with just a little twitch has completely changed. And he says, nothing that the gods of genetic engineering wouldn't let you in heaven for. And he leans into him. He kind of takes him by the cheeks like he's going to kiss him. He does. He gives him this kiss on the lips. And there's this horrible shot, because obviously the cutaways to Sebastian, who's watching this sort of through a bunch of foreground stuff, this candelabra, when he sees them start to get along and he sees Terrell start to reason with him and even show him affection, the sense of relief in Sebastian is so palpable, and it's so tragic because out in the audience in movie land, there's no sense of relief throughout the scene ever. Batty takes him, gives him the kiss on the lips, and then keeps squeezing his head until we start to hear his skull crack. He puts his thumbs up under those glasses and gouges his eyes out until the blood runs down his face. There's so much intense violence in this movie, but this is the most violent thing in the film for sure. To even though you don't see in a horror gore sort of way, the crushing of somebody's skull, to hear it and recognize what it is without seeing it is almost worse. Yeah. And certainly we've seen a lot of potential eye violence. This is where it really, really happens.
Yep.
And the music is swirling. Sebastian is quivering in fear.
Yeah, I was going to say, at the same, in the same way we just saw Sebastian relax, we immediately see him just repel in horror at what's happening,
but frozen in horror.
Yeah, frozen.
And Batty isn't just killing him; he's crushing his head like a jealous Roman god. It's hard to explain. But Batty's his whole how dare you? I mean, his suffering is so palpable, and the fact that he's learned to love and that he's going to lose that, and that he's starting to accept the reality of that is just brutally harsh. And the music's still wailing away, and he kind of gets up from this settee that they're on, and Sebastian doesn't know what to do. He's snapped out of it. He's running this way. He's running that way. He doesn't know where to go. We see Batty's back to him, sort of chase him out of screen, and he says, "I'm sorry, Sebastian," he says to him. And he means it, but it's not going to save Sebastian. We don't need to see how that plays out physically, and we're thankfully spared having to witness it. The scene before it's over cuts to the ride down, the lone ride down in the elevator.
Yep.
And we see, although we can't know what he's thinking exactly, we see that he's contemplating what he's just done. He's met his maker and destroyed him. And again, Howard plays, maybe in this just brief shot of him, he plays maybe 3 different profound things that go across his face. And it ends with a weird, God, I don't know.
Yeah.
The weirdest, not what you would expect. Again, everything about Howard, really all these replicants, but him more than any. He's a madman. He's a wild man. You just do not know what you were going to get from him, and his reaction to this particular scene is no different.
Right.
So go ahead.
I was just going to say, in that whole madman, it's like. It really hit me when you said he's learned to love now and he knows he's going to lose it.
We've seen that.
Yeah. And it's to me, when you said that, it made me think like this is replicant puberty. This, he
really is.
Yeah. And so he's just got that blind rage that you get when it's all of these emotions and feelings and everything that are coursing through him, even though it's digitally coursing through him, it's still doing it. And he, and it's too much a lot of times, just like it is when you're a 13 or 12, 13, 14-year-old kid. And he
doesn't say gods of genetic engineering. He says gods of biomechanics. Nothing that the gods of biomechanics wouldn't let you in heaven for. I don't know. I feel like I should correct that because, again, all these lines are so iconic and so amazing.
Well, even though we haven't released this yet, I mean, was already getting comments.
They were
saying,
rolling in.
Yeah,
if we're getting comments already, why don't I get any of those floaty heart things that everybody else gets when they go live online?
That's TikTok, baby. Anyway, while Terrell is taking care, Roy's taking care of business at Terrell Corporation. Deckard is tracked things over to Sebastian's apartment.
Really, and to Ford's credit, he's right about this. Deckard's actually just gets a call while he's in his car saying, "Hey, we just found this Eldon Terrell was killed, and we just found this J.F. Sebastian in with him. We found traced his apartment back to." So again, no detecting going on. Deckard is even not allowed to have any cool off-screen presumed detecting.
Yeah.
We hear it all in this little phone call on his console. And again, we hear Bryant, after seeing the horror and the humanity of it, hearing Bryant in his skin job, sort of non-caring voice spell it out for us is just terrible. It's a very clever juxtaposition. There's lots of cool atmosphere here. A flying cop tells Deckard he can't drive on the street, blah, blah, blah. It all looks cool. There's some weird little hijackers who, like Sebastian, probably didn't pass the physical to go off-world, who tear some mechanical thing off the top of his car. Yeah. So there's all this. These scenes aren't about that stuff. It's that all this stuff is always, even in a dark, desolate, empty street that he's on, there's all this stuff happening all the time.
Right.
In the movie, and that never stops, and that's very, very cool. So Deckard gets the number. He pulls up to the front of the Bradbury, which we recognize from the big spirally pillars that are out front. And he dials in the number, and we see kind of but we know her voice, and we know she's in there. I don't know why she answers the phone. Again, I think this isn't hard to understand. Pris probably would answer the phone. She would know enough not to reveal herself, but she'd be dumb enough not to sort of just react to a thing that is happening. Like, I hear people complain about it. Why doesn't she just not answer the phone? But I kind of get it.
She has no reason to think that that
yeah, but she does. She hides her face. She says, "Who is it?" She's acting suspicious. She's not hiding any of her motivations very well. She says, "Well, who is this?" He goes, "Hey, is JF there?" And she goes, "No, who is this?" And he goes, "Oh, this is Eddie, old friend of JF's." And again, Harrison, every time he pretends to be somebody else, it plays a guy pretending to be somebody else. It's fun. He plays this slightly Southern guy, which, as we know, Sanderson has a hint of that. Not so much in this movie, but in most of his other films. And I think him in real life, which is probably where Harrison got this from. And she just, boop, screen goes dead, and he goes, that's no way to treat a friend. And one of 3 long walks through the Bradbury building. And I'm telling you, even though it's 2 of 3, even though none of them, anything really happens, I guess there's a lot of exposition when JF and Pris first go in. But it's just...
Yeah, it is.
His long walk up the elevator, down the hall, the door is open a crack, him coming in, his standing in the doorway, discovering these toys and all this stuff. Plus, there's toys everywhere. It's hard to explain. Mannequins and things, little spirally gizmos and shit. It's not a busy place, but there's movement everywhere. And so it really is a tricky place to track anything. And to make matters worse, it's full of these humanoid figures. Most of them are inert, but nevertheless, it's a great place to just disappear and hide in. And Pris, we see her do exactly that. And we see this move with her eyes. That is, the eyes have it in this film, truly. And her little thing where she twitches and her eyes like flip open or whatever. Yeah. It's alien and weird and robotic, and yet it shows sort of fear and tension all at the same time. But she's hidden herself amongst these things in hopes that she won't be noticed. And of course, it's however you spin it, it's still Daryl Hannah in a bodysuit, and so he does notice her. And he comes up and he kind of slowly slides this veil off of her. And it's one of those, like, she's keeping completely still. He gets in real close and looks, and then boom, she just knocks him clear across the room. And again, Pris, we learn so much about her, and I don't want to demean her, but her sort of lack of imagination, her basic pleasure model intellect comes out at this really unfortunate time, at least for her. She knows enough to knock the gun out of his hand and then beat him up and sort of incapacitate him. But to finish him off on more than one occasion, she backs way away from him and does these sort of weird acrobatics that she's going to kill him with, probably because that's her skill set. I mean, I don't think it's like I'm being dubbed or I'm rubbing this in. I really think she's been taught to do flips and be you know what I mean? And that's where even though she's clearly tougher than Deckard, that's where a more diminutive replicant gets their strength from, is running up to stuff. And but she leaves the gun sitting there on the floor. So on one of her thing where she's doing all these black backflips and stuff, he just reaches over, grabs it, and shoots her, and then she kind of falls over. And again, maybe. I don't know, Joe. Maybe this is the most violent thing ever.
This one is it's the twitching, it's the death throes, it's the thrashing,
it's the squealing.
It's the squealing. It is there. It is really this one is really horrible.
She has a seizure of death essentially along this wall that he's next to, and he keeps shooting her, and we want this to stop really, really bad. And yet when he shoots that last shot, Ridley cuts to slow-mo. This whole thing is just visually arresting, and you can't look away from it. And that last kind of death throw that she goes through, and then as she hits the ground, he cuts back into real time and just lifeless corpse of Pris, this very, very alive person that we spent the movie with. It just falls to her death. And then we have the third of three long walks up, though. It's not as long this time.
Because Roy's home.
We see Roy coming out of the elevator and coming down, and Deckard must hear that or something, because he goes and hides, or he hears him come in the door and call her name. I think that's what makes him go. So he runs down the hallway, hides around the corner, and Roy comes in looking for her, and we can see it's a great shot down the hallway, and we know where Howard is, and it's this room after room. It's hard to explain. It's like Napoleon era, like French palace that this place is set decorated. Like it's all plaster, and yet it's all got patterns to it and everything. And
it's very Louis XIV.
It's all these rooms with all these arches and no doors. It's weird, and there's lots of places to hide, but it's also cavernous and massive with a huge high ceiling. Roy comes around the corner, and when we see him, Deckard takes his shot, and Roy jumps out of the way. Yeah. And Batty somehow knows Deckard's name. He keeps calling him by name, which is weird. Roy discovers Pris first, but he's affected by it, but he doesn't dwell on it. He knows somebody must be here. And this is where the taunting starts. It's hard to explain, but that we've got a good, 5-6 minutes of Roy taunting Deckard and torturing him and scaring him to his last wit, essentially. And that's the point. He's teaching him a lesson. The same lesson Leon was trying to teach him to some degree, not so much to torture him, but to make him feel what they feel like, knowing that death is imminent at all times. And there's this moment where he says, come on, Deckard, blah, blah, blah. I'm right here. All you got to do is shoot straight. And Deckard tries to shoot through the wall. They're on the other sides of the wall. And he says, he actually shoots Batty, hits him, but he hits him in the ear and doesn't kill him. And Batty says, straight doesn't seem to be good enough.
And and also I want to talk about
I forgot about the first thing where he reaches through the wall that he shoots him through.
But even before that, Roy is starting to malfunction. He goes claw hand again.
That doesn't happen.
That's not yet? No. Okay, so first it's It's he smashes through.
First, he sees Priss, then he quietly goes hunting for Deckard. Then Deckard misses the shot. Then he starts taunting him, and what happens is they're on the opposite side of this wall with this water running down the wall. It's raining outside, and like it is for most of the movie. And what happens is you see this wicked. It's one of the coolest gun props in all of film, and it's certainly one of the most powerful handguns that I think we've ever seen in a movie because it just obliterates people. Yeah. It's what it is the hilt of a rifle or of a shotgun with the shotgun chopped off and the hilt part chopped off. So it's just a handle. And then it's got these couple of little lights put in it so that it looks all modern and cool. Yeah. It's a wicked cool gun. I'm not a gun guy, but Deckard's gun is the coolest gun in movies as far as I'm concerned. Like everything else in this movie. You see the close up of the gun moving along the wall with it dripping and Batty reaches through the wall, pulls his hand through the wall, and takes the gun out of his hand. And then he says, he's talking to him the whole time. I can't relive the whole scene for you, but he says, "This is for Zora," and he breaks his index finger. And then he says, and Harrison Ford's, we've heard this in other movies, his howl is always welcome. His howl of pain when that happens is intense, and we feel it. We hear just the idea of getting your finger crushed and the sound of it is enough, but the howl in pain really, really sells it. Yep. And then he says, "This is for Briss," and he crushes his middle finger. And then and even the look on Deckard's face is like, what is going on? He puts the gun back in his wounded hand and lets go of it so that Deckard could pull his hand through the wall. And then he says, "All right, here's your chance, but you better shoot straight." And this is where he shoots his ear. Yep. So all this, I think it's the fingers, the gun, all of it. You have to track it all to get through this very physical sequence. So I'm sorry about that, but that's how it goes down. And Deckard shoots him and he goes, "Well, straight doesn't seem to be good at it. Now it's my turn. I'm going to give you a few seconds before I come."
Yep.
And Deckard just got the gun in his hand, and you can tell it's like he doesn't try and shoot him again. He's got more ammo in the gun, but he's had enough. This guy's insane. This whole situation is insane. I'm done killing replicants. They can shoot me, fire me, throw me in prison. I don't care. And he just runs the other way. Run from Roy Batty. It's hard to argue with that action at this point. He does nothing strategic from here on out. He's running in fear. He's running like prey in this labyrinth of this retro fitted ancient future that we've spent the movie in. Mm-hmm. But before Roy comes, he starts counting 1, 2. But he takes his moment, and I think this is what he really wants to do, because I think one way or another, Roy knows this is the end for him. He goes back over to Priss, and he kind of caresses her wounds, which is weird. He puts her blood across his face on his lips. He doesn't like taste it, but she's lying there dead with her tongue sticking out of her mouth like she's on a slab in a coroner's office, and he kisses her so that her expression goes back to neutral. It's like this weird, we've seen it 100 times, the eye closing. This is like some strange replicant love version of that. And Priss with her tongue out is kind of comical and gross, and Priss, like she's sleeping, is sort of beautiful and desperately sad. And that kiss makes that happen. And it's none of it's, it's movies. None of it's by accident. Right. It's kind of an amazing moment. And he keeps counting really slow. 3, 4. So Deckard can't hear him. The whole thing is childlike and terrible. He weeps over her body. And he says her name in this awful way. And then 5, 6, and he's off to the chase. And we see Deckard running this way, running that way. And we see this great shot of Batty zigzagging down the hallway. Batty's stripped down to his, he's got these biker shorts on. We'll call them. He doesn't seem like he does a lot of cycling in the movie, but you never know. It is a bicycle-filled
shorts.
world.
They're compression shorts to help with circulation.
Yeah, and he looks great in them, as you'd expect. He's in good shape. And Deckard, of course, we never see him without the trench coat on. I guess we see him without his shirt on a couple times, but he's a good-looking guy. He's a movie star, but he's not in great shape. He's been drinking the whole movie. This chase just goes really, really poorly. He climbs up a chimney, and he shows up in this. He climbs up not into a chimney like Santa Claus, but he climbs up this old fireplace and up through this hole in the ceiling that he spies. And it takes every ounce of effort he has. He needs both hands with his broken fingers, which he's tied the two fingers together. He's taken a moment to do that. And and it's actually before he climbs up the chimney where the clinch fist thing happens.
And we get a baddie.
Well, you see Deckard is that clinch fist where we were introduced to him, seeing that death throw move that replicants must suffer when they start shutting down. He starts making that, and he says, "No, not yet." He says to it, and he reaches down and pulls a giant. I shit you not. He pulls a giant 9-inch nail out of the wet floorboards, shoves it through his hand, at presumably the pain and the shock of which keeps him ticking for just a little bit longer. That shot too, with the skin before the nail, the skin expanding at the top of his hand before the nail punctuates through. So anyway, they both have punctured hands. One has an extremely metaphorical punctured hand, although somebody tried to suggest to me that there was a Jesus reference in some other movie, and I shot it down pretty harshly. You can't deny the symbolism here, but Patty's not exactly a Christ figure.
No.
Or maybe he is for replicants, and this is his moment, because none of this goes quite like we think. Starting with him giving the gun back. What a berserk and crazy thing to do. Well, Deckard's another floor higher, but he doesn't have the gun anymore. And as he's kind of coming through, Batty shoves his head through this tile along this wall, and he says, "You better keep it up, or I'm gonna have to kill you." And he's Jack Nicholson at the end of The Shining, frenzy, craziness, insanity at this point. And he is scary. He's funny. Depends on how many times you see the movie. He's everything. He's desperately tragic in these moments as well. And because they're near fireplace, there's a big iron rod fireplace poker there, and Deckard grabs it, and he comes running up to Roy, and he just smacks him with it across the face, and then he hits him with it again. And then on the third time, he swings back to hits it, and Roy catches it, and with them both holding onto it, he pulls him closer to him. And what does he say, Joel? It's one of my favorite line readings in all the movies. He says, "That's the spirit."
Yep.
That's so awesome. Because you have to, in the moment, you don't know when you're first watching Blade Runner. Please, God, I hope you all have first watched Blade Runner and you're not experiencing for the first time with me this incredible climax. But there is a lesson going on here. It's hard to explain, but that's the spirit. Fight for life. I've been fighting for life this whole time. You have been disappearing in booze and sleepwalking through life. Life that's a gift that I treasure and that I've done questionable things to bring about an extension to. Where's he going to go? He goes out the window. Yep. Deckard's got no place to go, so he goes out the window. Batty kicks through the window and comes out there with him. And he says, that hurt.
Yeah.
He's complimenting him on the ferocity of this. And again, poking fun at him. And Deckard even allows himself a smile here for some reason, because he's going for it. He's going to, in this trench coat in the rain, and this alcoholic guy is going to scale up this wall. He's got a couple of places to put a foothold, but he, at one point, the film, and this is maybe not so believable, although climbing is about leverage more than it's about strength, there's one point where he's holding on to this thing by nothing but the two good fingers left on his hand. I find that a little tough to believe. But hey, it's a cliffhanger. It's a really cool cinematic one. And eventually he makes it to the roof. And then he sees there's a hatch on the other side of the roof. Some good luck for a change. And he starts running at the hatch. And when he gets right up to it, boom, the hatch door opens up. Batty pops open. His head pops out like a jack-in-the-box. And he's going to come at him. So he turns around. He runs the other way. I don't think he knows necessarily what's coming on the other way, but he's got to run.
Yep.
And when he gets to the edge, he's got to jump. And he almost makes it to the building next across the alley from the Bradbury that has these weird sort of industrial metal girders.
It's like unfinished. Yeah, it looks like it's unfinished and yeah.
Very industrial looking, given that he's in this movie theater / hotel district, but whatever. The future
repairs need to be made.
Yeah, exactly. So he doesn't get to the roof. He gets to the girder and he's hanging on to the girder. Then Roy sees this happen and he turns around on his way. When he flew open the hatch, a bunch of pigeons fly away. Yep. And in the meantime, he's captured one of these pigeons in his hand. So he's standing there with this white, we're going to call it a dove. It's a pigeon. They're kind of the same thing. The difference is that this is angelic and white and pure and very cinematically more powerful than a normal pigeon. So that's why it's here, no doubt. At this point, we're not thinking too much about any of this stuff. And he walks back to where the hatch is. He crosses his arms in front of him. We see the nail sticking out of one hand. We see a dove in the other. All right. Yeah.
There you go.
Christ is somehow involved in this. Don't ask me how, because this is not a movie full of religious symbolism, but this ending is certainly rife with it. And he runs, boom, 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 and we see him run, leap over Deckard, and land safely. Kind of does the old somersault fall safely on the other side. It's not the first time Roy's made a big jump in his combat experience, probably. And then we see him slowly, as Deckard's struggling to hang on, we see him slowly rise into frame as he approaches the edge of the building. And he sees him, and he kind of watches him struggle in it. And there's two shots, but it's the second shot, just amazing, of Horde hanging from this girder. You see how far it is down. It's impossibly far. I don't know how, they only went up a few stories in the Bradbury, so I don't know how they're 40 stories up in the air at this point from climbing up one fireplace. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but whatever. You can see the little lights from a car moving down there in the alley in between, and it's just a breathtaking shot. And Batty says to him, "It's a terrible thing to live in fear, isn't it?" Which is something we've heard before. And he says, "That's what it is to be a slave."
Yeah. And meanwhile, Deckard is trying to hold on.
Yeah, it's same thing as before, which is sort of cheap that they do this twice because they should have just saved it for here. But he slips off this thing. He can't hold on anymore. He is literally hanging by the two good fingers on his bad hand and his taped up fingers, and he's grunting and growling and hanging on for dear life. And we just know there's no. This is it, because there's nothing he's not going to recover from this. He slips and falls, and we hear Batty just holler out, and we see his hand with the nail through it grab Deckard by the wrist and slowly lift him up over past this girder and kind of up in the air with his coat billowing out behind him. I'm making it sound prettier than it is. It's really shot in a way that it would have to be realistically. And yet in cinema moments, and especially when I was a kid, when I first saw this, because I don't know. I don't know how to explain what a revelation, what a shocking surprise this is. It's just that howl, that scream, the desperate scream, followed by the shout and the grabbing of him and pulling him up on the building and throwing him over into the corner, while Deckard is bewildered and collecting himself to sort of get his body right and kicking himself back till he has something to lean on. We know somehow in this moment, because he's been telling us this whole scene, maybe not the whole movie, certainly not, in fact, but this whole scene, that something else is going on with Roy here that's different. Something's clicked, something's evolved in the final moments, and he's not just hunting him. He's not just torturing a mouse in a maze. There's more going on. When he decides to save his life, I don't know. But it's patently obvious that the torture is over. There's no second. Deckard still thinks this isn't the end, but we know that he wouldn't have done that if he didn't do it to save him. If he wanted to kill him, let him fall. There's no better way for your antagonist to go out than falling from a high place. We know that from watching the movies, right, Joel?
Right. Sometimes you got to Hans Gruber him.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He sits down, cross-legged on the ground, and just kind of, you see Batty's whole body, the tension leaves his body, just sort of sits down to rest. And then he gives this incredible speech that we really should say, since we've talked twice as long as the movie. It's a David Peoples speech, because it's full of David Peoples stuff, and it's stuff that David brings back to life in other movies and stuff. I've seen things, he doesn't say with your eyes, but he say, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. And then he says a bunch of stuff that we don't know what it is. I've seen sea beeves glitter off the Tannhauser Gate. I've seen something
attack ships on fire off the
shoulder of Orion. All those moments will be lost in time, like tears. Just then his line from the read-through, which stuck into production, like tears and rain, and it's raining. And then he says, and we've heard all this before too. He kind of takes a breath and says, "Time to die." And his head slowly droops down. And we know he's gone because his grip on the dove releases and the dove flies up to heaven.
Yep.
In one of it's for the final cut, it's a redone matte effect where the dove flies, because where the dove flies in the movie in the original cut looks terrible. And you always say, "Oh, I want the purity of and we say that. What did we say? We did 3 episodes on Bring Back or 2 at least on Bring Back the regular Star Wars, and every time that comes up, we talk about it. But this, thank God for this insert shot, because it's a powerful moment, and this helps the power. And if they'd have just had more time, that's something they could have done in 1982. So it doesn't stand out like some crazy digital trickery. But that dove flying up and Harrison Ford's performance in the wake of this is because we spend a long time with him before the next thing happens, glancing back and forth. And of course, that's because in the original film, this is where a big voiceover where Deckard explains it all to us happens. Some of the voiceover I think is kind of cool. It's a detective story, like a hard-boiled voiceover is not out of place in a movie like this. It didn't feel out of place the first time I saw it, but here, when that voice, if you hear it now after seeing it since 1992 without it, to hear it is it's hard to explain, but it's like getting slapped in the face when the talking starts. It destroys this moment, this wordless, powerful moment of revelation. And again, it's all shot so great. We see Batty sitting there motionless with the rain dripping out of his hair. We see a spinner come up behind him and hover there, and then zoom up higher. And it's kind of cross-cut and cross-faded, so you feel the time moving a little bit. And then we see from Deckard's point of view, he's looking down the rooftop and the spinner's sitting there, and Gaff standing there all crooked with his cane. And he says, I guess you're through now, huh? And all Deckard can mutter is, finished.
Mm-hmm.
And Gaff tosses him his handgun, which he was kind enough to apparently go into the building, check out the forensics.
Well done,
so
Gaff.
You really get the feeling that Deckard's just been sitting here in awe for a while for that to make any sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense. He could have found that gun in that crime scene so quickly, but whatever. Cool gun. It's back in the movie. We get another cool close-up of it. I'm all for it. And then he starts kind of limping off to leave, and he turns around and he says, and I guess you're through, huh? By the way, it's the first English language thing we've heard Gaff say other than Lieutenant Bryant's name. He's been acting like he doesn't speak the common tongue. He's been saying this language that almost literally, the script calls it street speak, but almost literally made it up out of Spanish. And it's a combination of Spanish, Hungarian, and these weird sort of slang things that he bridged the two together with. And he says the line to him, he says, it's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does? And he heads back to the spinner. Then no crossfader, a hard cut to the elevator door on floor 97 in Deckard's apartment, opening, and him coming down the hallway to his apartment and his opening up the door. And this is an unsung moment, I guess. This is a place where a lot of people argue you don't need any sort of narrative fakery, like we just get to the point here. But this is important. He comes in and he says Rachel's name, and he says it 3 times, I think. And the way he says it's like no sound we've heard come out of this guy for the whole 2 hours we've spent with him. It's this desperate, pleading sound. It sounds like somebody trying not to cry is what it sounds like. It's hard to explain. He's a better actor than that, so it doesn't have histrionics to it, but it's just, Rachel, it's just crazy. And he comes through the apartment and he sees that she's kind of laid out here. And again, the close-up of the gun coming into frame from above, where with his bad hand wrapped around this gun, we see that he's had a little bit of medical attention since he arrived at home. He takes with his thumb the bed sheet that's over her, and he pulls it back and reveals her face, and her face isn't doing anything. And you see his head come into frame, listening for her breathing, and then you see him sort of gasp in relief as he realizes she's breathing, and he starts kissing her, and he kind of kisses her awake. We've all done that, but on the cheek and everything. And she looks up at him, and he says, and it's this great thing. She's looking up, he's looking down, they're inverted. And he says, do you trust me? Or as he says, do you love me? First. Yeah, let's ask that first. That's a good one. Do you love me? And she says, I love you. I don't know how they could have loved from their brief thing together, but you really get that he needs to know if she does, or thinks she does at least. And then he says, do you trust me? And she says, I trust you. He says, okay, come on. And then next we cut to out in the hallway, and he's standing in the hallway, and he's kind of looking to see if anyone's out there. And then he waves her in, and Rachel does the great Rachel waddle over to the door.
Right. Well, she's still in a pencil skirt. Yeah.
Exactly. But she just can't. She's not moving stealthily. It's adorable in a way. I really do dig it.
Yeah, she needs get the woman a pair of slacks, and everything will be fine.
Something like that is in her future, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because these guys intend to go on the run together. And he waves her on, and then he sends her ahead across this little walkway to the elevator. We've seen this geography 3 times now before we see it. And we were just reminded of it. And as she's running, we get a close-up of her very impractical heels, and she knocks over some little thing that's sitting there and gets to the elevator door, and he follows after her and leans down and picks it up. And it's It's based out of what looks like the foil part of a like a juicy
Chewing
fruit
gum
wrapper.
chewing gum wrapper.
Yeah, stick a gum wrapper. Origami unicorn. And he looks at it and he smiles slightly and he nods and crumples it up in his head and nods, heads to the elevator. The elevator door closes. Fantastic 5.5 minutes of Vangelis, like upbeat dance music comes into play. Like nothing else that's in the movie, but F it. This is his moment to do whatever the hell he wants, and it's a brilliant piece of music. And the credits start to flutter by in front of us. And hey, I got through it with time enough to spare to give some awards away and to talk about some deeper meanings and some versions.
There you go.
Let's start with versions, because here's where a big departure from the original theatrical cut happens, actually, right in this moment. The movie doesn't end here. In the director's cut that came out in 1992, and in the final cut, and in the script, and in the original shooting schedule, the film ended with that door slamming and the music kicking up in a fury and the credits rolling by. And that music's so, I don't know how to tell you. Like, you can't dance to timpani exactly, but you feel like a replicant could. It's just this otherworldly, amazing piece of music. I could listen to it over and over and over and over again.
You know why? You know why you could listen to it? Because you're a replicant.
Boom, 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 boom. God, it's so cool. In the theatrical cut, and I actually I don't hate this ending. It ends with a voiceover. You see them driving in his car, and reflected in the windshield as they're driving, and he's looking over at her, you see trees. We haven't seen anything resembling a tree in this movie. We haven't really seen, there's been a daytime scene or two. It's too bright for the first Voight comp test, for example, but we really haven't seen daylight ever. And when you see it at the end of the movie, as they're making their move north, it is kind of amazing. It hurts your eyes, and I kind of dig it. And he's got this voiceover that's like, well, they said that Rachel was special. No termination date. We didn't know how long we had, but then again, who does, or whatever. And then then the music starts. And it's co-shot with excerpts from The Shining, the aforementioned The Shining, where they took some outtakes from the helicopter trip up in the opening credits of The Shining and stuck those in. And you can kind of tell because they don't fit right, because they were both shot with totally different cinematographic processes, both films. So that's a crazy ending. That's the happy ending, they call it. I think he smiles at the end. I think the ending's happy enough as it is, with the door slamming shut. But he says Gaff had been there and let her live. It's just Johnny explains it for y'all. It is. I used to dig it. I used to think it was kind of neat. I still like it for what it is. It's well done, but this movie's so much better without it. Right. You figure this shit out. You figure it out. You've been told everything. And you haven't been told the things that you don't need to know. So deliberately, the questions have been asked and the answers have been left lingering. Amen. The voiceovers, while I think written okay and performed a little flat, but they are film noir voiceovers. They're usually a flat kind of experience. Harrison Ford was accused of reading them poorly, so that they wouldn't be used. He disputes that. He's like, I wouldn't read a bunch of ADR poorly. I was disconnected with it and didn't think the voiceovers were a good idea, and that might, to my shame, have come through the performance. But, I did these the best way that I could well after the movie was over. It's like, I don't know what you want.
Yeah, he had moved on. He was, he
hadn't had a pleasant experience making it. So anyway, and Ridley, because the director's cut eschews the voiceovers, Ridley was often told, and he never disputed this, much to his shame, that those voiceovers were like a producer-enforced idea to explain everything to us, but they were his idea from the start. The writers didn't want to do them. The producers kept asking him to take them out. There are literally old producer notes and test screening notes where they say, why are these horrible voiceovers still here? They're awful. Harrison Ford at 2 years ago's Oscars read these producer notes about Blade Runner to the audience. I think in that setting, we didn't have enough context to get how kind of amazing his reading of those notes were. But it wasn't they take a lot of flack, Jerry Parenchio, and this is the last time I'll say their name, and Bud York, and they take a lot of flack for trying to undermine Blade Runner, trying to fire Ridley Scott or whatnot. But they were right from the start and to the bitter end about the voiceovers. The movie's way better without them. Although that's, take it with a grain of salt, because I grew up with those voiceovers. I know them more or less by heart. They informed my opinion of what's going on in the movie. So when you take them away, I still know the information that's there. So the film's maybe not as impenetrable to me when I watch it without voiceovers. Hard to say. Plenty of people have watched it only without and done okay. I think the film's one of its great strengths, other than its visual splendor, is it's letting you make up your mind on a few things.
Yeah,
You're on your own. I think there are probably right answers hiding in there. And I'll get to right answers here in a second. Let me just quick run through the versions. This will only take me 2 seconds. The theatrical cut that came out in the United States and the international theatrical cut. They're the same cut, except the international cut has the eye gouging, has the nail puncturing the hand. The U.S. theatrical cut is nothing more than a censored version of the original theatrical cut. Therefore, the international version, if you want to watch a version with voiceovers, is the one to see. There's no reason to see the censored U.S. version just because you're from the U.S. I really appreciate that all these versions are available, but international for that, because it's like a TV version. The other version, it's not changed much, but it's the film's violence is violent. It's horrifically violent, gory, but it's meaningful. It's meaningful violence. It's important, I think, that it be there. Pris getting shot not once, not twice, 3 times it's important. Same with Zora. To take some of the violence out it's trying to make things easier on the audience, and I don't like that at all, especially when it comes to violence. If it's going to be violent and horrific, then feel the violence and feel the horror. That's the whole point. Otherwise, it's just mean. I've said that a bunch of times on the show, too. Sorry for repeating myself. All right. Theatrical versions. Then, director's cut came out in 92. Suddenly, he's thinking about a unicorn. What the hell is that? And where do the voiceovers go? And hey, look, it ends before they go off into the mountains. It's really the only difference is he didn't change it dramatically. He really didn't change it dramatically at all. Took out the voiceovers, took out the studio enforced happy ending, and reinserted this sequence that was important to him. And of course, we see a unicorn more than once in the movie, and it's worth thinking about what that means. If I were a worse podcaster, I would broach that subject and we'd bring all that up and we'd hash all that out. A, we're out of time really to do that. But B, there's no reason to hash that out. Even if you've never seen it, or if you have seen it and have your own ideas, there's no reason to hash that out. Only thing I would say to you is make sure that your ideas about what those things mean are your ideas. Because the people who wrote it and the people who acted in it don't agree with the people who directed it. And they don't agree what that means. They disagree, and they disagree vehemently about what that means. So there's room for disagreement there. There's a case to be made for what that evidence, the outcome that it suggests. And there's tons of evidence on one side, but there's tons of meaning on the other, and tons of incongruities, tons really, that a cheaper meaning brings out in the movie, in my opinion. But that's my opinion. You can't say, well, Ridley says this, because Ridley, unlike David Lynch, when he was asked what he thought that meant, told us. And I think that's criminal. I think when you ask David Lynch what the end of Mulholland Drive does, he goes, it's interesting when people do this. Like, he just won't tell you. It's the last thing he would ever do. But David Lynch is a writer. Ridley Scott, and he made one of my favorite movies of all time. He made several of my favorite movies of all time. So God bless him and thank him for that. It ain't entirely up to him. So don't come to me with that if you want to discuss this further. And just for your own sake, don't take his word for it. Don't take mine. Don't take Joel's. You see how quiet he is sitting over there. That's probably wise. Make up your own mind. It's one of the joys of this film. It's, to quote Michael Ironside in Starship Troopers, is the choice is one of the only things you really have in life. Make your own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Cronenweth shot Blade Runner. It's maybe the best lit movie ever made. It's certainly in the conversation of best lit movie ever made. Terry Rawlings edited Blade Runner. It is brilliantly edited. And Terry Rawlings, like in Alien, his temp score was so brilliant that a lot of older Vangelis music found its way into the movie, much to Vangelis's frustration. But it's great because the saxophone is a powerful sexual thing, and we only need that so much when we're giving twinkling piano and some other interesting choices elsewhere. Plus, 2 years before Blade Runner, Vangelis wrote a song called Memories of Green. And that's the song that's used in it. I mean, it was meant to be, right?
Yes, but is the sexy saxophone music as good as
Yes, it's so much better. Although, say what I might about how brilliant Blade Runner is, they do both belong to the same family of music cues. That can't be denied. That is what we're talking about. We're just talking about it on an artistic level, heretofore unmatched.
Right.
Who else do I got to talk about here before we send this away? Well, Lawrence Paul, the production designer, the people who built this thing, all the reused model work and all the reused like foreground things and all the miniatures. In a movie today, you would never see reused scenic elements the way you really do notice them if you pay close attention to Blade Runner. They only had so much, and Ridley really wanted his film to be cluttered, and it is. They used the Yukon building twice. They used the cop station twice. They used those spirally pillars, which are super recognizable when you go hunting for them, 4 times, like many times in locations where they can really only be in one location. But it doesn't matter. Ridley was right. The Bradbury looks unlike it ever has in anything. It's just kind of amazing and incredible. Charles Nodes and team's costumes, the makeup is absolutely incredible. We talked about the actors, so you got to talk about the casting because I think this movie was a Jane Feinberg, Mike Fenton deal from a casting perspective. I'm not 100% sure on that. They did an awesome job. The sound people, are you kidding me? Everybody did amongst the best work of their careers in Blade Runner. But more than that, I love it because even if the answers are uncomfortable, even if the answers never come, especially when they never come, like all great speculative fiction and really like all great Philip K. Dick, where this germinated from the very beginning, ask the biggest question there is: who are we? Who are we really? Mm-hmm. And it explores that in a dark and haunting way. It is better probably on that level than if you examine each little human interaction looking for, some sort of natural honesty. I think it's higher philosophical honesty that we get. And if I have a tip for you, if you somehow haven't seen it and this 4 hours makes you want to, is I would kick back and try and engage with it on that level. And the way to engage on that level is not to sit down with your notes and be a scholar. It's to kick back and let the thing wash over you and see what goes on. That, to me, is turning your brain off in a way that's productive when you're watching a movie. Leave your preconceived notions at the door. But you shouldn't have to, because Blade Runner's gone from a box office disaster, really, that could have ruined careers, to one of the most beloved, and as Joel said a couple of times last week, in the conversation for best ever science fiction movie. I believe it absolutely is in conversation. I think it's unquestionably top 3. I think it's got some pretty sturdy competition in a couple of places.
Absolutely.
But really, really, really good.
Yep.
And that's why we spent so long talking about it. And that's why I really want to do a deep dive. And I hope I did it justice. Thanks to Charles de la Sirica and the author of film Future Noir for enhancing my love and reminding me that I wasn't alone, and for giving the thing life again after the fact, and for Ridley for sticking to his guns and for being brave enough to revisit something and, dare I say, actually improve it.
Yeah,
every time.
Absolutely.
It's pretty amazing.
All right, everybody, that is going to do it for our deep dive into Blade Runner. Are you mad at us? Are you mad that we didn't? You know what? If you're mad at us for not talking about, is Deckard a replicant? I want you to come back and tell me and answer me this. Why did Tyrell lie to Deckard and say that Rachel was a replicant when clearly she's a real person? Let's talk. Come
That's
at
great.
me.
Let's end with confusing the hell out of the audience.
All right, reach out to us at the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page on Facebook, at Ask Joel and Ryan, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and the Movie Show with Joel and Ryan page here on YouTube. If you are watching it, like and subscribe, give us a rating, do all the things wherever you enjoy your content of audio and or visual. All right, everybody, that is going to do it for us for this week. We sure do love you.
Thanks for your patience. Thanks for your patience, Joel. Good Lord.
Thank you for listening to The Movie Show with Joel and Ryan. Remember, all views and opinions represented in this podcast are personal and belong solely to the speaker and do not represent those people, institutions, or organizations that the speaker may or may not be associated with, unless explicitly stated. None of these views and opinions were intended to malign or deceive. And now, here's the producers, circa 1982, to play us out.